Okay, does anybody have any questions before we start? Exam number 1 is Monday. So last time we left off looking at the 2 of the 3 major measurements of macroeconomic activity, and they're all kind of interrelated to each other. So we've got kind of the big 3 that are emerging that I want you guys to keep in mind. So the big 3 goals that we hope policymakers in Washington and other people are thinking about carefully as they change things. And number one of our things we're looking at now is real GDP. Real GDP was our measure of economic growth. The dollar value of all final goods and services. All the stuff we buy turns out to be equal to the amount of money that we earn in terms of income. So real GDP was an important one. Now, what made it real? What was sucked out of it? The price effect. A price effect was sucked out of it, which brings me to one of the big 3, number 2, is inflation. Now, we put some equation goggles on last time and learned that inflation was the percentage change in what? The price level. So an index number, an average level of prices, a number that reflects the average level of prices in a given time frame. So inflation was the percentage change in the price level, just to kind of recap what we did there. And economic growth was what we were thinking about here, was the percentage change in real GDP. So when we start changing things into growth rates, that kind of ties into these big 3. This is 2 of the 3. It would be negative growth. Yep. Or a dip or a recession, and that's when we get into recession. If the economy's down by something, well, with inflation, it's deflation. So I'm glad you brought that up. So these numbers can be negative. I'll just mention it now rather than maybe cluttering up this concept here. But if it's a negative number, then it's deflation instead of inflation. So you might jot that down. I guess it doesn't hurt to maybe go deflation is when the percentage change in the price level is less than 0. It's a negative number. And same thing with negative growth. We'd have a fall in economic activity. All right, what do you think number 3 is? Of the big 3 things that we're thinking about, what's kind of missing here? We've got economic growth and real GDP. We got prices. So we got prices of stuff. We got the actual stuff. Stuff, prices of stuff. And then what else is an important variable that is meaningful to your parents and grandparents and family members and other people? Employment, right? So having a job. So that's a little bit different than these 2, but there's a relationship. So the big 3 is real GDP, inflation, and then unemployment. And we'll spend some time learning what exactly does unemployment mean. So right now, I just want to keep these three at the top of our minds as we work through not only this chapter, but future chapters. So what we're doing in this class then is in these early chapters 4 and 5, we're learning how to measure these things. How do we measure them? Well, it's the sum of P's and Q's. We filter out the P. We kind of learned how to measure these things. And then those variables are going to carry through the rest of the semester. And we're going to learn then how to start making predictions and using some simple models to see, well, what if we have a new program of cash for clunkers? What is the impact that we'd expect some sort of government program to have on the big three? And now we can start to make predictions about the effects on the big three. All right. So last time we uncovered a potential issue with one of these measurements, the CPI. So the CPI was the Consumer Price Index. We wrote it out last time, so I won't do it again. And that index number is the price level. So the CPI is one of those types of index numbers that measure prices. And what type of prices were we measuring? What kind of stuff? Consumption. Like more specifically, what type of stuff? Consumption stuff is kind of a broad umbrella. I'd agree with that, by the way. The basket of goods. So think about that shopping cart. What does the typical household buy in a given month, in a given week? So the CPI measures the prices of that stuff. And we did 4 biases, 4 reasons why that might be kind of messed up. And so we had the 4 types of bias: new goods bias, quality bias, substitution bias, and the outlet substitution bias. All reasons that, hey, maybe collecting data that way might be a little bit messed up. And we found that it might be messed up in one particular direction. Does it tend to overestimate inflation or underestimate it? Over. So it was tending to go a little bit too high because it wasn't taking into account maybe coupons and discounts and other things. So we these biases led to CPI overestimating actual inflation. Which we'll be using that notation pi. So one way just to kind of think about it is that whatever that CPI estimate is, using the basket, maybe we make this into a little shopping cart, make it all cutesy here. That CPI estimate of what's going on with prices is actually probably tending to be greater than the actual inflation rate. So who gives a rip? Why are we concerned about it? It was, we wrote last time, I think, the CPI is the most widely used measure of inflation. So that's the one that gets used a lot. Well, where does it get used? So who or what uses the CPI? Who or what uses the CPI? All right. You guys know COLA, but you might not know COLA this way. A cost of living adjustment. A COLA clause. A cost of living adjustment. Okay. Okay, so many times we see people who have either fixed situations of income, union contracts, if we're looking at a labor situation at a business, and the union has negotiated a 5-year deal with the company that we're getting paid $20 an hour now in 2013, but over the course of the next 5 years, we're going to receive at least a cost of living adjustment. What would be the significance of that occurring? What are they trying to account for? So the union negotiated a $20 an hour wage rate, but it also came with a 5-year thing that's going to be fixed. If it remained truly fixed and you're making $20 5 years from now, have you maintained your standard of living? No. So if we think about it this way conceptually, if you take your little shopping cart to Target, are you going to be able to put as much stuff in the basket with your $20 as you could 5 years ago? No, because prices went up, right? So the actual quantity of the stuff that you're buying is going to go down if we paid you $20 the whole time. Aha, got an idea. Why don't we, I don't want to increase your standard of living, but I would like it to maintain constant so that in 2018 when you go to Target, you can put the exact same quantity in theory of the number of bottles of shampoo and conditioner and 12 packs of soda and packages of underwear or whatever else you're throwing in your shopping cart. You can buy the same amount of stuff with that, $20 5 years from now. So we're going to give you a cost of living adjustment on that $20 pay that you're getting. And what do you think we're going to use to estimate what that is? The CPI. By using the CPI, are we giving them more than what we really wanted to or less? More. Now, this is where we've got to start thinking about what's going on here. So if the CPI said inflation was 3%, but the CPI tends to overestimate the actual inflation rate, which is really 2%, what I really want to give my employees is a 2% bump so that they can put the same amount of crap in their shopping cart as they did 5 years ago. But by using the instrument provided to us by the government, in this case with the CPI, I'm giving them 3%. So I'm giving them more, which sounds good. If you're an employee, you're getting more money than you should have, and great. Let the chips fall where they may. All right, so the cost of living adjustment is often used in contracts. So used in long-term contracts. So that could be union wage contracts. I used to do quite a bit of work in commercial real estate, and so if you signed a 10-year lease with somebody to lease your building to run their business, so the Subway on Main Street, if he doesn't own that building, he's leasing it, and he agreed to $2,000 a month, well, we can't predict what that's going to be, 5 years from now, what things are going to cost. So we'll write right into the contract with a CPI adjustment every year, every third year, or something like that to kind of catch up for the loss in purchasing power. So union wage contracts might be that way. We might have commercial leases, commercial lease contracts, which would be rent adjustments, essentially. Rent adjustments. Loans can fall into that. Not necessarily under cost of living, but yes, they're another form of an adjustment that can go on. So yes, loans of various sorts. Anything that's kind of longer term in nature that you can't have a crystal ball to perfectly predict. This is a way we can kind of safeguard our purchasing power over time. Okay, some other things that enter into this. It could kind of conceivably fall under the contract, but unemployment claims and Social Security. Uh-oh. Who's that? Reno? Okay. Anybody else on digital stuff while we're at it or didn't sign so? Abby, you got everything shut down over there, I assume? Everything's closed off? Okay. All right, just a point. No big deal. Thought it was maybe that I heard that they were doing fire alarms or something with that ringtone you got there. All right, so Social Security, we got long-term fixed payments that are going on, and so that's going to have a cost of living. Some government contracts with companies can have payment streams going out. All right, so back to the question of, okay, so there's potentially an error here where we're overspending. That might create some winners and losers. Here's the big note. 1/3 of government spending government outlays. 1/3 of government spending, that's G in our cigarettes, C plus I plus G plus X. 1/3 of government spending is linked to the CPI. And once again, you might rightfully say, so what? That's interesting. Well, over 10 years, over just 10 years, that's $1 trillion. $1 trillion of overpayment of your tax dollars to other people. All of a sudden starts to become a little bit bigger deal now, right? The little overstatement of the CPI can have some dramatic consequences. 1 trillion, by the way, is our deficit this year. 1 year's worth of whoopsie. We didn't quite balance the budget, government spending over tax dollars, so it's a lot of money, a lot of money. And that's all from this, just using this particular instrument for what we're trying to do is hold purchasing power constant. All right, so in summary, it creates kind of some winners and losers. So the bias creates some unintended winners and losers. With the wage contract and the employment situation, in this case, the employee gets more than what they were intended. So employee wins, which maybe we kind of like to hear, but it's not very efficient necessarily. Employee wins, employer loses. With the commercial lease, who wins and who loses? The tenant and the landlord. The landlord wins. The landlord wins. And the tenant loses. I'll skip the bank for now. We'll come back to that one later. With government spending, who's the winner? And who's the loser? The government doesn't win in this case just because the government's kind of transferring the money. So think about the end result. The taxpayers lose. That's maybe the easier one to identify. So everybody as a whole loses, and then who ultimately ends up winning? The unemployed, anybody who's receiving these benefits, the unemployment benefits, the Social Security benefits. If you are the gun company, if they're buying weapons of mass destruction from some, where didn't I write, government contracts, if you're the recipient of that, then that group is winning. So whoever the recipient of the funds are, so recipient of government funds wins and the taxpayer loses. Now, what taxpayer? That's another great question that we'll get into later. It's not necessarily today's taxpayer. If we borrow and we don't worry about it until I'm dead and you're paying it, right? So it's actually you possibly paying it, not me, in a given time frame. What's a taxpayer, what's not a taxpayer. So we can kind of shift things through time as well, is another slippery thing of the whole deal. Okay, so that's some issues around our number 2 measure here of inflation and the price level. Does anybody got questions on that? So this just kind of raises issues of why, things we need to think about in using these measures. There's usually some pros and cons to all of them. In fact, let me just ask you, what was the pro to this? What was the benefit of using the CPI? Why has it continued to be used the most widely? It helps you get the price level, but we had other things to be able to do that. There was something kind of, the timing of it. It was very timely. So we got that was really the key thing to it, is we got information fairly quickly with the CPI. We're collecting that data. We've got actual human beings going out to stores and looking at the things you look at. They're looking right at the label and saying, this is $1.54, this was $1.56. So we're collecting data right on the spot and getting that out to the public fairly quickly. That's a big benefit to have that. Maybe over time, by the way, they've tried to make some adjustments to overcome these biases. But at the end of the day, we realize the biases with the cost of it, the cons to it, but the benefits still outweigh the cost. All right. So, unemployment. So, unemployment, first of all, good or bad? Bad. So, inflation, good or bad? Bad. Real GDP, good or bad? Good. It's just a measurement. A lot of these things are just a measurement. But I kind of want to keep you thinking about, how do we tell good from bad? Like, is it kind of, it's not good or bad, it just is what it is. It's a measurement. Now, a rate of change of real GDP that's positive and seeming to be consistent over time, now that could be good, right? So we can kind of transform some of these variables to give those implications of good or bad, but we don't necessarily know that right on the front end of it. Okay, so so here we are on our island. What's the population of our island approximately? 300 million people. Everybody who's not working is unemployed? No, why doesn't that? Give me some examples of people who are not working that you don't consider to be unemployed. Abby? Students. Okay, you guys might not be working right now, and you might not be unemployed, although you may casually tell your friends, well, are you working? No, I'm unemployed. Are you really unemployed? Right? Who else might not be working, but you wouldn't really consider them to be unemployed? People not looking for jobs, okay? Children, little kids, are they unemployed? They're not working. Well, little baby here. Got to get that thing working one way or the other. People are retired. They chose not to. You got old people. Okay, who else? People in jail. Handicapped people that can't work for some reason. Their handicap is such that it's that debilitating that they can't work. Lots of people out there, right? I mean, it's kind of silly now that we're talking about it to think that there's a distinction there, but there's a very important distinction. So of the population, there is a subset of those people that could maybe be working in theory. So we're going to kick out the kids, even though we know they can work in different capacities. So we start to get somewhat out of the conceptual realm and into what the government and maybe most of us would generally agree seems like a fair way to do it. So our next step down from that is the working age population, the WAP. The working age population. This is the WAP. So that is people 16 years of age and older. We are not going to include the people in jail who are over 16. So not in jail, not in the hospital, not able to work for some reason, and not institutionalized in some way, shape, or form. So as long as you're 16 or older, not in jail, not in a hospital, or there's some sort of institutionalized setting, then you fall into the possibility of working. In theory, you could be working legitimately. All right, what do you think that is? Is that half these people, a third of these people, 290? I mean, we got 300 million people on the island. What fraction do you think that would make once we kick out the kids? Let me just hear some guesses. A fourth? 140? 2/3? So a little bit higher? Just kind of fun to kind of be thinking about where it's at. So in June 2010 is where I got this information. 238 million. So 2/3 is sounding pretty good there. There's our working age population. Now, we just got done saying that not everybody who's in the working age population we'd call unemployed. So you said some students, some retired people. And so now we get down to the last thing of what we want to consider people here. And I think maybe Katie said it. What's the key feature of whether you really think somebody's unemployed or not? Whether they're looking, whether they want to be employed, or whether they're employed, right? So do they want, what's their desires? Do they want to be working? And if so, are they actually working or are you not? If you want to, that kind of tells something. That next subgroup is the labor force. The labor force is everybody who wants to work. So the labor force is all people of the WAP, all people of the WAP, working age population, that want to work. All right, well, whether you think from the WAP or whether you think from the total population, How many people do you think want to work on our island? None. That's a good one. Okay. I think there's some people that want to work, but that's a good theoretical argument. We might want to work because they need the money or something. I guess we could rephrase that. What do you think? Half? It can't be higher than this one, so it's got to be something a little bit lower or a lot lower. 180, 200, 210, 237. All of those are a little too high. 154 million, about half, a little over half. The labor force is about 154 million people.
So those extra 134 are not labor force?
What's that?
Those extra 100.
Yeah, these are, so then if you're going from the working age population, now you've got the retired people and some students that are 24 that aren't working but they don't want to work, right? So we're kicking out all those people. Stay-at-home dads that are staying home with the family, stay-at-home moms. Of course, we know they're working if they've got at least 2 kids. 1 kid's not too bad, but it's still some work. But they're really working if it's 2. This is a little theory of mine. I only have 1 child, and so I noticed that my friends that either have 2 or more, I've got some friends that were 4, and he's pretty neurotic and kind of crazy. But what I noticed was if you go from 1 to 2, the level of work increases exponentially. That's not a linear function where you go from, okay, I got X amount of work for 1 kid, I'll just have another kid, and then that'll be double the work. Well, it turns out to be more than double. That's some sort of exponential function, because then they start fighting and bickering with each other, and you got extra things to shuffle around. So anyway, that's a little side theory of mine on kids. And then once you get to 4, 3 or 4, I think it kind of levels out. Then it's like, well, I might as well keep adding them on now that I got 2. But that 1 to 2 jump is very significant. I've been very happy with the single child situation. We actually wanted to have more. We had a couple miscarriages, but now we've got 1, and he's awesome. And then I've learned after the fact that there's a lot of virtue in 1. So now I tell people it's okay to have 1. Like if you want 1 and you think 1 is okay, you're okay. You're not inhumane by only having 1, because people say, well, why don't you have another one? You might be making a good decision if you do it intentionally. All right, so of this fraction, we've got some people that aren't working and some people that are working. So of this number, of the labor force, that's now composed of the employed. That means you got a job. So these are the number of people working. What's that? Oh, yeah, we could probably call it E, I think. Don't usually use that one too much. And so of this number, we're at 139 million are working. And the rest of them, this is the 2010 during the recession, so this is kind of a little bit heavy of a number. It's the balance. 15 million is the unemployed. The key thing here is that both of these people want to work. Some of them are working, some of them are not. Not working, and maybe we'll just kind of reiterate this, but want to. Unemployed. All right, so the unemployment rate currently is about what? 8%. Yes, it's a little under that now, and the prediction by economists is that it's going to drop even further. I think it's at 7.9, and I heard they might even expect it to drop to 7.6. So still in the high 7s, but definitely a good sign for the economy if that continues to fall. So now we've got to put some equation goggles on to tie this together. So the labor force is equal to the number employed, which we could use the E now that Michael's got our E here, so I could have probably put E, but number employed plus the number unemployed. If that was what? UE. Oh, for this? Yeah. The big U is going to be, well, I'm not there yet. So that's why I wanted to hold off, because it's the unemployment rate, which is right where we're going now. So now I can come up with the rate. Similar to these percentages, it's convenient to express them as a percent. So if I want to know what the unemployment rate is, how do I manipulate this? What do I do? The unemployment rate is 7.9%. What am I doing with this formula? Number unemployed divided by the labor force. What is the fraction of people that want to work compared to the number that are not working? So the unemployment rate, which we're going to use big capital U for that. That's why I was saving that compared to the number unemployed. There's a difference. The unemployment rate is equal to the number unemployed divided by the labor force. So if we were to plug in these numbers from 2010, 15 divided by 154, 15 divided by 154 sneaks us up around closer to that 9–10% range. Times 100 to convert it to a percent, that little trick of the hundreds to shift the decimal place over 2 spots. And put a little note to yourself. I know some of you haven't been working numbers all the time. This is really just to shift decimal 2 spots for percent, to convert it to a percent. So then we can say it's 10% or 7.6%. All right, so now we can manipulate this thing around a little bit too, and think about the employment rate and the unemployment rate. So the employment rate is the number employed over the labor force. Just another way to think about it. So we're, if we're more positive, hey, that glass is half full, not half empty, then you're saying our employment rate is 90%, right? Just a twist on the presentation of the numbers. And so then another way to write the unemployment rate, so let's put a little note here. The unemployment rate could be looked at as 1 minus the employment rate. So get comfortable with this top equation that you can kind of go back and forth. This means there might be a homework question, there might be an exam question that gives you the number employed, and I say, what's the unemployment rate? And you'll have to kind of manipulate it backwards. So I can give you one thing or the other, so you kind of have to think about this. But this makes sense, right? If the employment rate is 90%, 1 minus 0.9 is 0.10 or 10%. So you can kind of go back and forth. All right, any questions there? All right. So let's see. I was thinking about using this. Is this the appropriate time? Yeah, I think this is the appropriate time. So this kind of ties the inflation talk. So before I get another level deeper into unemployment, I want to think about something here on wages, employment, and kind of cost of living. So this is a little bit of a hybrid in between. If you live in the great state of Kansas here, and you make $40,000 a year, maybe that's a nice starting pay for you or something. Are you living kind of the same standard of living, cost of living, as somebody over here in San Francisco? Yeah, so I know we got some California people here. You are not only a little bit less, but you're kind of impoverished, right? I mean, you can barely scrap together enough to go to McDonald's, maybe. Possible. I'm being a little bit dramatic there, but so $40,000 doesn't get you to first base in California, but it might be pretty decent over here in Kansas. So you got to be aware of that cost of living issue. And the flip side is kind of more interesting to think about maybe. If you get offered a job and you're thinking, well, where should I live in the world? You know, Kansas is kind of flat and this, but there's other places to think about too. But geez, I heard that the starting pay is $80,000. And you're sitting in little Kansas and you grew up in a little town of Kansas and you're like, $80,000 is more money than I ever dreamed I'd ever be making. You know, I'm going to apply to that job. What you ought to be careful about with your $80,000 pay then? It might be the same or much less possibly than what your $40,000 in Kansas is. So that's what we mean by factoring into what your real pay is, what your real wage is. And we'll come back to this later, but I wanted to think about your real wage. So your cost of living at a point in time on February 13th of 2013, your cost of living can vary across space on a given day, right? Stock variable, flow variable, you with me? Kind of thinking about a point in time, the variable pay or wage can vary depending on where you're at. A similar thing then is what we're doing is when we're talking about, well, what does it look like 5 years from now in 2018? That slice in time. What are the impacts of inflation over time? If your pay stayed $40,000, then your real pay has gone down, right? Your purchasing power. Assuming there was some positive level of inflation, which we can almost bank on now in the United States, you can't put as much in your shopping cart. And so we need to think about these at a slice in time effects. Should I move to California? Should I stay in Kansas? Should I go to Florida? Should I go to New York? Which thinks about the price level, the pricing of things at a slice in time, as well as what's going to happen to my pay over time. So one of them's cutting across time periods, the other one's staying within time periods. All right, all of those things are kind of linked to why we calculate inflation, what it is, because I think somebody brought up, does Kansas calculate inflation? The answer is yes, and so does California. So you have this data that can be very localized that you can use to calculate these things beyond just econ class to see how you can do on the test. Okay, questions or comments on that? All right. How do people become unemployed? How do people get unemployed? Brainstorm time. Tell me, let me have it. How do people get unemployed? Sexual harassment. All right. Sexual harassment. Good. What else? What's that? Fraud. Fired, seasonal. So if you are a snow remover guy, you're not doing so hot in Kansas this winter or last winter, right? So something that's seasonal, construction work, concrete business is very seasonal. You pretty much, at least up in Iowa, it's a little more in Kansas. The old rule of thumb was you can't be laying concrete past Thanksgiving. So Thanksgiving to spring, whenever the thaw gets out of the ground, you're out of work if you're in the concrete business. So seasonal work, what else? Just got another job, okay? You suck at the job. They suck at their job. All right, I'm going to put both up there. So you got another job lined up, kind of transitioning, or you suck at your job and you got fired is what you're saying, right? So you suck, I think was the Ethan comment there. That's why you got fired. Is that where you're going? Okay. What else? Okay, just start looking for work. Okay, so maybe you just graduated and you just started looking. You're like, you woke up this morning, today's a fresh day. I'm going to go get a job.
They quit.
You quit. Okay, so voluntary quit. Take this job and shove it. I ain't working, man, I don't know. Okay, outsourcing. Maybe you got, let's see, let's go. I can wipe out this. So a job got replaced by somebody over in India or something else. So you got outsourced, a job replaced by outsource. That's kind of a big deal nowadays. What's that? Replaced by technology. So maybe a machine took your place, right? So new technology. Downsizing. Waiting for a callback. Maybe you've been laid off because it was seasonal. So you're waiting for callback. Maybe after an interview, whatever.
What about underemployed?
What's that?
Underemployed.
Underemployed, I want to be totally without a job. We'll talk about underemployment later. So underemployment's the concept of, well, I really want to be an economics professor, but in order to pay the bills, I'm going to take a job at McDonald's just to kind of get by. And guess what? You're employed. You count as being employed. You are gainfully employed with your job, but you're what we call underemployed, possibly. All right, so, of this list, I want to think about good and bad employment. Not from you, like pretty much if you're unemployed, unemployment sucks, right? So I want you to step back from that concept. Kind of be the benevolent dictator or God looking over what's going on our island. I want you to step back from the island again, look over the scenery, and tell me, are all of these things bad? What's not bad? Technology. Why do you say that? Good for the country. Sucks for you that we don't, need VCR repairmen anymore, but it's good for the society that we've got DVD players and more advanced stuff with streaming online and whatnot. So that's kind of good for society. Caused some unemployment, but good. Anything else? Outsourcing. Less expensive. Maybe it frees up other opportunities. That one's probably a little bit ouchy for people, but possibly. Okay. Quitting, right? If it's a voluntary, I hate this place, you hate me, I hate you, I'm out of here. I've saved up enough money that I can live by myself just fine until I find another job. Is there anything wrong with that in the big picture? No, right? So there's forms of unemployment that not only can we get away from the good or bad, but you'd expect in a healthy, growing economy, there should be some type of unemployment, some kind of natural churning of people in and out of jobs. We call that frictional unemployment. That's one of the 3 types we'll talk about. We'll pick up there on Friday.